Damn, I hate homies, I said to my partner Jax as we pulled up in front of an apartment complex. I'm with you, brother. Let's just get this over with, he replied. Almost all domestic conflicts I have encountered in my 23 years as a police officer have ended calmly after a lot of shouting, threats, and sometimes fists, but rarely have arrests been made. By the time the police are called, a fight between spouses has escalated into a rather tense situation, but by the time we arrive, the parties to the conflict have usually come to their senses and calmed down. I suspect the dark blue uniforms and weapons play no small part in this. However, occasionally, things go wrong, and the guys in uniform turn out to be the bad guys. In a bickering couple, I've been punched, shoved, and bitten at house parties before. I'd rather face a gun-waving thug. When we got to the door of the couple's apartment, a tall, pretty woman with a dark red bruise on her face let us in. She told us that her boyfriend was in the kitchen, so I left my 15-year-old partner Walter Jackson with the woman while I cautiously made my way toward him. The man was standing with the refrigerator door open, sipping a beer and looking somewhat disoriented. His face was bleeding from a large cut above his right eyebrow. We had been talking quietly for a minute or two when I felt a searing pain in my right deltoid, almost simultaneously with the sound of a gunshot. Looking closer, I saw that the woman was holding a small pistol and was about to fire another shot when a second explosion sounded, and the woman fell to the floor. "You okay?" shouted Jax, coming closer. "Oh, damn, Rain. You got hit." With my other hand, I reached to my shoulder and brushed off a handful of blood. Damn, 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 I muttered. 23 years on the force, and the first bullet I took was in a domestic. My arm throbbed and bled a lot, but since it hurt less than the time I'd broken it, I hoped the bone wasn't badly damaged, if at all. The guy pulled a clean towel out of a drawer while Jax moved the woman's dead body and called an ambulance. By the time the paramedics came for me, the guy and I were already sitting at the kitchen table, and I'd made all the preliminary preparations for the call. While the paramedics were stabilizing me for the trip to the emergency room, Jax came over to check on me. With everything that had happened, I had to admit that my adrenaline levels were off the charts, and I was incredibly grateful that Jax had saved my life. "My God, Jax, I'm so glad you were able to grab her before she put a second bullet in me," I said. "You saved my ass, buddy. I owe you a big debt of gratitude. If you need anything, I'm your man." Although Jax saved my life, he got a 3-day jail sentence for actually creating the situation. He let his girlfriend go to the bathroom unaccompanied shortly after we arrived on the scene, and she popped out of the bathroom with a .22 caliber handgun. It took me about 2 months to return to duty as the small caliber bullet only grazed the bone. But when I returned, Jax was no longer my partner. He had served his 25 years in the service and retired. I tried to talk him out of it, but he said he was sick of all that damn and wouldn't be on the force anymore. God damn it, he was a great partner as well as a close friend. 2 months later, he packed up and moved to California to become a writer. When best-selling author Walter Jackson came to town, it was always a big event. One of the TV stations in town always wanted to talk to their favorite son, and wherever he came, people always came up to him for an autograph, often with one of his books in hand for him to sign. For me and my wife, Tracy, it was a very big deal. Jax always stayed with us for a week or so when he was in town, and I usually took a few days off so we could socialize, reminisce, and drink. Tracy and I had known Jax long before we became partners in the Metro Police Department. The three of us had been friends since we were 5 years old and lived on the same block. We were pretty much the Three Musketeers. If you saw one of us, the other two were probably quite close by. Tracy was a bit of a tomboy, so she was right there with us as we played baseball and army while the other girls in the neighborhood were busy playing dolls and dress up. When we hit puberty, things got a little weird. Tracy's breasts grew. Her small, bony frame suddenly started filling out her jeans and shorts. Her mother thought this was inappropriate, so she had to stop playing soccer with the neighborhood boys. Soon, she was spending a lot more time with the other girls, snuggling up to each other, whispering, and giggling. It got even weirder when I learned that Jax had asked Tracy to be his date for the 8th grade Valentine's Day dance. They had whispered and giggled a lot in the weeks leading up to the event, and then I caught them kissing near Jax's locker in the school hallway. I was suddenly an odd man out. We were no longer the Three Musketeers. Now it was two musketeers and an outsider. At least my feelings were hurt a lot, especially when they continued to be a couple after the dance. They continued dating through the end of 8th grade and almost all of 9th grade until Jax made the biggest mistake of his life that spring. He was caught kissing Mary Lou Reagan under the bleachers. No sooner was the news over at Robert Frost High School, than Tracy suddenly became a free agent. In one day, I went from near exile to her comforting friend. You could say I had no pride, but I had replaced Jax in Tracy's heart in no time. I'd never interfered with the relationship between Tracy and Jax, but I wasn't going to hesitate for a second to claim the prize that was Tracy Watson. Within a week, she was already my girlfriend, and I didn't feel the least bit guilty about it. When Jax's infatuation with Mary Lou ended a month later, he tried to convince Tracy to go back to him, even though he knew she was with me. It was the only time he and I had argued in all the years of our friendship. For her part, Tracy told him that she was with me and no longer interested in him. After a couple of weeks, he seemed to accept her decision. Over the next 6 months, he gradually came back into our friendship. Jax was my best man when Tracy and I got married 6 months after graduating from Michigan State University. He had already been on the police force for 2 years when I joined right out of high school. 8 years later, I was a sergeant, and he was a detective. When we became partners, I thought it was a great partnership. Unfortunately for Jax, his relationships with women didn't last as long as our union. His first marriage lasted only 3 years, and his second lasted 5. Both ended because he cheated. You know me, Rain. I like variety. One woman gets boring after a while, he told me one day as we were driving around town. Tracy is a wonderful woman, but I don't know how you do it. Just one woman, wow. Despite his inability to keep a woman, Jax remained a good friend to both of us and was also a very good uncle to our 2 children. He was always invited to our home for holidays and birthdays and often vacationed with us during the years he was free. We were all sorry to see Jax go to California, and we looked forward to his return. The children were especially excited when he came to visit us because he always brought them great gifts, especially after he became a successful writer. This time, for the first 2 days after arriving at our house, Jax seemed a bit reserved. I decided to give him a couple of days to come talk to me before addressing him. I realized it was serious when he called me by my first name, Mason, saying we needed to talk. Remember when I shot that woman in the house and saved your life, he said quietly as the 2 of us sat in the family room watching TV while Tracy made dinner in the kitchen. How could I have forgotten about that? You bring it up every day when you come to visit us, or we come to visit you, I said, chuckling at what had become a familiar joke. I need to do you a favor. You will, won't you? He said, leaning toward me from the chair he was sitting in. I'm dying, Mason. For real. The doctor says I have about a year to live. An inoperable tumor in my brain. I stared into his eyes. Jax could be a great joker, but I could tell by the look in his eyes that he wasn't going to put me in harm's way. What do you want from me? I answered as seriously as I had never answered anyone in my life. I want to take one last trip around the world and use it to write my latest book. I want to take Tracy with me to share my adventure and be my transcriber, he said. Wait a minute. It sounded like he was asking me if he could take my wife on one last trip around the world before he died. He couldn't seriously be asking me that, could he? You told me whatever you need, I'm your man, remember, he said. I felt dizzy. My stomach felt like I'd been stabbed. You can't be serious, I whispered. I never promised you, my wife. I couldn't, and wouldn't, promise her to anyone. I've already talked to her, Rain. She understands what it means to me, and she said she's okay with it, Jax said quietly but seriously. No, 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 no. I don't care what she said. You're not taking her with you. I promised you anything, that doesn't say anything about anyone, I said. Don't be ridiculous, but you promised me, Jax. When you promised me that after I saved your life, you'd give me anything I asked for. I know it's a lot, but I only have a year. After that, I'll die, and she'll be yours forever. Did you hear yourself? I promised you everything to no one, and I'm not giving you my wife for a year. I'm sorry you're dying, but I'm not going to give my wife for a year to you or anyone else, I said, my voice getting louder. You promised him, Rain. However you want to present it, and since he's dying, I've been living alone for almost a whole year now, ever since my beloved wife left me for another man. I said my beloved daughters have come over for a couple of days, but mostly I'm alone. I come and go as I please. I live my life the way I want to. You've lived your life as a world-traveling hell, well, welcome back to the real world. How can we rebuild a relationship if we don't even sleep together? Well, Tracy, we have to reconnect and go back to the way things were. Yes, you say that, but I can't believe that after all this time you didn't know me enough to realize it would never happen. You ruined our marriage. You were promiscuous with another man. Uncle Jax was dying, Daddy, Stella started to say before I interrupted her. Have any of you girls ever told your husbands exactly what your mom did during the year-long break in our marriage? I asked sharply. Hearing no reply, I continued, why not, girls? Because you know your husbands wouldn't approve, because there's no way any of them would let either of you do what your mother did. Why is my wife allowed to, as Lucilla and their wives are not? We drove in silence most of the way until I told Tracy about the new sleeping arrangements. But the girls returned to their husbands a few days after Jax's funeral. The house was as quiet as it had been when I was alone. I was used to quiet when I was alone, so I didn't feel the need to disrupt my routine when Tracy came home, especially since I had nothing to say to her. I also continued to cook my meals and not partake in the meals Tracy prepared. This is ridiculous, she shouted 5 days later when I once again ignored her invitation to dinner. Yeah, I'm sure, I said, that a few times since you left me to enjoy your World Hell Tour. And before you say that again, yes, I know he was dying. So what of it? It didn't give either of you the right to do what you did. It was just a cheap excuse for you two to openly mock each other. Stop trying to make it look like you did something honorable. There was nothing honorable about you spreading your legs for Jax. I had the feeling that Tracy had never apologized for her infidelity. I knew she felt no remorse for the act. Hell, She hadn't even apologized for hurting me with her betrayal. Could she be that deluded, that self-centered? Almost a year spent traveling the world with another man has given me all the answers I need. Since Jax had no immediate family and knew he was dying, he had already prepared his estate and will by the time he died. The reading was scheduled for just 3 weeks after the funeral, and the only people who received special invitations were members of my family. I assumed that we, or at least Tracy and the girls, would likely inherit most of his estate, which I estimated at several $1,000,000. As I told my attorney, I don't want any of his money because I believe Tracy had earned it on her back. Nevertheless, she told me to attend the reading and keep my mouth shut no matter what happened. Promise me, Rain, promise me you won't say one disparaging word to anyone during the reading. Anything you want to say, you can tell me at our meeting the next day, Twilight said. I promised unhappily, but I promised. The kids came home for the reading of the will, so we had a house full of spouses and grandchildren. Tracy made the exact point that it would be much more convenient if she moved back into my bedroom and gave the guest room to the grandchildren, but I vetoed that right away. There's no way she's going to get a chance to try to convince me to let her back into my life when I read the book. I wasn't surprised that Jax left each of my girls $1,000,000 trust fund. They considered him an uncle, and he had always been very kind to them over the years. He also left $1,000,000 to the United Way and another $1,000,000 to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. There were several other smaller bequests, and I could see Tracy practically twitching in anticipation as each bequest was announced. The attorney then announced that the next will be dealt with the remainder of Jax's estate, $8.4 million in his home near Sacramento, and it went to me. Tracy squealed with delight, and I sat at the conference table in shock. I started to say something, but somehow I remembered the promise I'd made to Twilight and kept quiet. Tracy stood up and moved to hug me, but stopped when she saw my gaze. The lawyer interrupted our silent conversation by almost forcibly shoving an envelope into my hands. I tried to pull my hands away, but he wouldn't let me. You need to read this, Mr. Rainwater. It might make you think differently about some things, he said. The kids were hugging me and crying. My 2 sons-in-law grinned like Cheshire cats. Tracy was grinning from ear to ear. I felt like I was living in a scary dream. I knew I had to say something, so I invited everyone over for dinner, the newly minted millionaire, of course. During the meal, I sat at the table mostly in silence. I don't think anyone was interested in what I had to say. Everyone seemed satisfied. Meeting Twilight was enlightening, to say the least. Like Tracy the day before, Twilight squealed when I told her that Jax had bequeathed most of his millions to me. For you, not for you, and Tracy, Twilight asked, suddenly serious, as if having a heart attack. Yes, just me. What's the difference? Everything I have belongs to her, and everything she has belongs to me, right? I asked. Not exactly. Even though you're married, it was you who made the bequest, so you, not you and your wife, have complete control over that money, she began. Wait, I interrupted. Are you saying that I get to decide, just me, what to do with that money? That's right. And since you said you didn't want to keep the money, you can give it away, but remember you'll have to pay taxes on it first. Remember when I asked you not to file for divorce? Here's the reason. You can give the money away, but if you file for divorce, the money would be included in your estate and divided in half. So, pay the taxes, gift the money, and then file for divorce 6 months later. Then you would have to divide all the property you have, but the bequest would be gone. Sound like a plan? Twilight smiled flirtatiously. Oh, Did you know that there's a foundation set up by a private group in the state that helps widows and children of police officers killed in the line of duty? Genius. Pure genius, I said in genuine amazement. Yeah, and maybe you go on your vacation, so no one can find you until you get it, sell the house, pay the taxes, and use that money to fund your vacation, she said. How did you know he'd leave the bulk of it to me and not both of us? I asked. I didn't know, but it seemed logical to me based on what you've told me about him. I figured he would feel so guilty to you that he would leave the money to you alone as a gesture, expecting you to split it with his wife, and the divorce he knew was coming, Twyla reasoned. He never thought you'd have the intelligence or patience to see it through. Thanks to Twyla and the tax expert she enlisted the services of, I managed to get things done, well, but very quietly. A couple of weeks later, returning to the house after another day of work, I found Tracy staring at her phone and crying as she flipped through the photos, obviously lost in grief. It shouldn't have surprised me that she had a treasure trove of photos from her adventure. After all, she had sent me and the girls many pictures throughout the year. I pretended not to notice anything and went upstairs to change, but another plan was already brewing in my head. My wife was like a 15-year-old girl with her cell phone. She was constantly talking about it, and it was never out of her sight, except when she was taking a shower, which she did every night before bed. That evening, as soon as I heard the shower running, I went to the guest room and got her phone. I have to admit I was surprised that it wasn't password protected. I went into the Photos app and deleted everything, grinning to myself like an evil hell. A few minutes later, I was still giggling in the family room as I deleted all of her trip photos from the cloud. Just as I was finishing up, Tracy walked into the room with a towel wrapped around her wet hair, as usual. I didn't greet her. We rarely talked, except to exchange information, not that she didn't try to talk to me. What's so funny, Rain? She asked. Are you watching another rerun of The Office? Cat means I replied, clicking on the hidden screen and enlarging it. I quickly turned the screen in her direction, then turned it back to me. Believe me, I knew I was being childish, but hell hath no fury like the rage of a deceived man. I may not have been a screaming madman like some, but I was bleeding just like everyone else when I was cut. I guess I should have expected it, but 2 days later, I walked in the door, and the mother of all hurricanes was blowing through my house. You son of a hell, you bastard, she shouted at me as I stepped across the threshold of the house from the garage. I can't believe you did this. All my pictures. All the pictures of me and Jax. Tell me you backed them up and hid them somewhere, please. I looked at her tear-stained, distraught face. You'd think Jax had died all over again. You told me that when he's gone, he won't play a role in our lives, but you're always looking at his pictures, reliving your adventures. I went through all your pictures. It was so much more than just the comfort you provided my former best friend, I argued. But he's gone now. I can never get those pictures back. You low-life bastard, she cried. I shrugged nonchalantly. Truth be told, I didn't care. You can't be the arbiter of Manus, I said quietly. For the next 2 days, Tracy growled at me. I never once turned my back to her, fearing for my safety. I made sure to lock the bedroom door at night and any time I wasn't in the room. Tracy always went grocery shopping on Saturday mornings. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when she left, and neither of us had said anything until that moment. She hadn't been gone 5 minutes when I called an Uber and brought down a large suitcase and carry-on. I thought for a long time about what to say to her in the note I was going to leave, but in the end, I didn't have the words to say anything more than hell you, so I decided not to leave any note. I figured she'd figure it out later when I didn't show up at home. It finally started talking around 9 p.m. At least that's when the first call came in. 3 more calls came in when I turned the phone back on after arriving in Lisbon, Portugal. I also detected 1 call each from my daughters. I listened to the messages but did not answer any of the calls. I was on vacation. Since Tracy hadn't returned to work after her vacation, I knew she'd be at the house Monday morning when the bailiff showed up. Over the previous 6 months, I had done all the clichés of divorce, split our finances and cancelled our joint credit cards. That would be more than enough for her for a year if she didn't do something stupid like buy a Lamborghini. Twilight called me around 4 p.m. Lisbon time. I was sitting in a small cafe enjoying a dry red wine and 2 kinds of cheese when my phone rang. According to my server, she didn't take what was going on very well, Twilight said after we were done with pleasantries. She especially didn't take it very well that you filed an adultery claim, even though it has no bearing on the settlement. The pictures of the 2 of them engaged in adultery shook her up pretty badly, my server said. Did you send them to my daughters, and also separately to my sons-in-law, as we discussed? I asked. For some reason, my girls think her sex with Jax is a mission of mercy. I wanted to make sure they saw her showing mercy, and I wanted my sons-in-law to see what their wives consider mercy. There should be some very interesting discussions in these homes tonight. I did as my client told me to do, with appropriate wording, Twilight said. Thank you, I said quietly. I'm not proud that I did it, but I'm tired of being called the bad guy. She cheated, but somehow the bad guy turned out to be me. I was deeply tanned and well rested when I returned to my house 8 weeks later. Tracy ran into the kitchen but stopped abruptly when she saw my face. No, this was not the happy reunion she had hoped for. I don't know about you, but I enjoyed Portugal and the south of France the most, I said. But I probably could have enjoyed it more if I'd taken a shagger like you with me. She stared at me for a moment, then wrinkled her nose as if she smelled something wrong. Have you finally calmed down? She barked. Now we can stop this nonsense and get back to our place. You know I'll do anything to make it up to you. Why in God's name should I want to get back together with you? It wasn't very nice if you could just take off with another man for almost a year, I said. RRRR, he was dying. He was our best friend. It was the least I could do to comfort him, she said, her voice getting louder and louder. That tired argument has lived longer than Jax. Just because he was dying is no reason for you to unilaterally decide to hell him for a year. You were my wife. We took vows. You don't own my body. It belongs to me. I say who gets it and when, she shouted. Wrong. We own each other's bodies when we took our vows, giving up everything else, I said. She tried to fight the divorce and ended up hiring an attorney. The first thing her lawyer did was ask for an accounting of all of our assets, together and separately. Only a day later, her lawyer called Twilight and asked where I was hiding the money Jax left me. The lawyer informed me that the money had been gone for months. Mr. Robertson, my client, didn't want to enrich himself with the money his wife made from prostitution, so after paying his taxes, he donated it to the State Police Widows and Orphans Fund, Twilight told him. He can't do that, shouted Tracy's lawyer. That money belongs to both of them. He just can't spend it as he sees fit. They both had access to the joint account at the time, but the most important thing to consider is the fact that the money was left directly to my client, not to my client and his wife. As an heir unit, I suppose she has the right to challenge it, but considering the gift has been sitting in the charity account for more than 6 months, she's going to look like the real Grinch who stole Christmas. Twilight said the charity's lawyers have carefully considered this matter before accepting the gift, and we will not hesitate to take this to the press. My phone started ringing off the hook about an hour after Twilight called to tell me about her lawyer asking about the money. I hadn't responded to her attempts to contact me since she went on her adventure, and I saw no reason to change my policy. So, after my kids started calling, and even though I knew what it was about, I answered anyway. "Gosh, Dad, you didn't give away all of Uncle Jax's money, did you?" Stella seriously half questioned, half shouted into the phone. "Of course, Stella," I replied, brightening up. The people at the foundation were thrilled, and it seemed to me that Jax would have been pleased with the donation too. "But Daddy, you know he'd want Mommy to have some of that money." "He loved Mommy," Stella wailed. "And here's the rub, baby. He loved my wife, and she loved him back." "My wife?" "I think you're allowed to love whoever you want, but you should know that when you love someone else's spouse, things can go wrong. And as for her, I was the only one she was supposed to love that way. She crossed the line. She disrespected me." "Why do I have to explain this all the time?" I said. I moved into the apartment a couple of days after I got back from vacation, knowing that as soon as she found out I'd spent Jax's money, there would be an immediate uproar. It turned out to be a wise decision. After that, rumors started flying about me donating the money. Most of my friends and the police force thought I was crazy. I spent a lot of time explaining my thoughts to the guys and also to other people when they asked me about it. I was surprised that so many people felt entitled to give me their opinions on how I spent my money. Because of this, I didn't go out much after my return. My life became work and home. My girls didn't visit me at all, resenting me for suing Tracy and giving Jax's money away, but my sons-in-law visited me from time to time. Lori's husband, Grant, visited me secretly, and Stella's husband, Abel, bluntly told my daughter that he wasn't going to leave me because Tracy was hell. He told me that his marriage to my daughter was on thin ice because of her continued defense of my cheating wife. "I'm just wondering when my day will come, Dad," he told me one evening as we drank beer on my patio. "She needs to know what Mom did was wrong, and I hope she's just expressing support rather than agreeing with what Mom did," Abel said. Twilight stopped by one evening with a bottle of Glenmorangie single malt wine and a 5,000-piece puzzle. "I know you're not officially divorced, Rain, but there's a whole world of good women out there looking for a nice guy like you. You should get out there and dip your toe in the pond, so to speak. I'm not saying you need to become a total hell like your wife, but since you applied months ago, no one, well almost no one, is going to blame you for trying to find a company," Twilight said. "You know it's too bad you don't have the writing talent like your late ex-partner because all of this would make a damn good book. I mean, there's a bunch of details you don't know because your wife will never tell you, but you know more than enough to have the bones for good fiction and can fill in the rest from your imagination, Rain." I raised both eyebrows in appreciation, and then he picked up the phone and smiled. "I know a little more than she thinks I do. My ex-partner liked to rub it in my face from time to time," I said. "There was a threesome in Greece and a couple of Maori police officers in New Zealand. I have videos of both, and you never told your lawyer about this," she asked with a slight approach in her voice. "I knew we didn't need them to get what we needed," I replied, looking Twilight straight in the eye. "Not that I'm being a saint. I'm not saying I'll never use them." It was Twilight's turn to raise her eyebrows. "Every time we get together, I learn something new," she says. The more I thought about it, the more I recognized that I liked Twyla's idea of writing a book. After all, I had the time. After all that was going on in my life was work. If Jax could do it, and I certainly knew he wasn't a literary genius, so could I, especially since I already had the blueprints for the story right in front of me. 2 months later, I was officially a free man. I made a reservation at my favorite restaurant in Col. Twyla, who is now officially no longer my lawyer, you memorized my number. How nice, she said, picking up the phone. I assume you're calling to celebrate gaining your freedom. You do realize that almost everyone calls me on Freedom Day, right? I guess I've never really thought about it, although it makes sense, I replied. But how many of your former clients call you to ask you out? I have a reservation at Serrano's tonight for 7 o'clock. I know it's really quick, but I didn't want to give you a chance to think of a good excuse to say no in a nice way. But that doesn't give me a chance to go home and change into something pretty for a date, she protested. You forgot that I know you always dress well for work, I replied. But I prefer to dress in a less lawyerly way for my evenings, she said. I'm sure I can find something less lawyerly for drinks and dessert at my house, I said. Well, how can I refuse, she said, knowing she would be well dressed. I put on my dark blue suit for our first date in over 33 years. Admittedly, I felt like a 16-year-old sophomore going on a first date with Emma Yaki. Now that I thought about it, I remembered that I had thrown up about 15 minutes before I was supposed to pick her up. She gave me her address in an upscale part of town, which didn't surprise me considering she was a successful attorney living on her own after divorcing her cheating spouse 15 years ago. What surprised me was that when she opened the door, she wasn't dressed at all like a lawyer. She was wearing a low-cut burgundy dress that ended a couple of inches above her knees, fit her narrow waist quite snugly, and seemed to flow with her as she moved. For the first time since I'd known her, her blonde hair was loose and flowed just below her shoulders. Oh, I said under my breath, but not too hard. Then I'll take that as a compliment, she said with a pleased note in her voice. I left a little early to get ready. I confess I lost my temper for a moment. I stared at her frankly from head to toe, as if she were a steak and I were a hungry lion. I realized she was looking at me. I hoped I wasn't drooling. I understand, Rain, she said softly. I know you're out of practice. I promise you'll take it easy today. I took her hand, and we set off on our way. When I was a lawyer, Twyla was engaging, funny, smart, and intelligent. This evening was unlike any I experienced in forever. I hold no grudges against Tracy. It's just that we've been hanging out for so long. Twyla was, figuratively speaking, a breath of fresh air in my life. We ordered a slice of cheesecake each, and I took her back to my apartment. I made coffee and poured Baileys into cups for both of us. Rain, can I borrow this shirt? Twyla said softly. You know I promised it would be less lawyerly. Oh, yeah, I said, undoing the buttons on my white shirt. She took my shirt and disappeared into the bathroom for a few minutes. 5 minutes after the cheesecake was done, we were kissing passionately on the couch. Truth be told, I've never been with a woman who seemed as responsive as Twyla. 20 minutes later, Twyla told me that it was time for her to go back to her house because she still had to go to work in the morning. I understood, even though I didn't have work until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I want you to know that I don't sleep around, and you're the first former client I've done it with, she told me. And in case you're wondering, I learned something new again. I felt myself blush at what I hoped was a compliment. You're one hell of a woman. Can I call you again? I asked, realizing I sounded like a lost puppy. I'll be very sad if you don't, she said, but I'll understand perfectly if you want to play on the field for a while. No, 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 no. How about we see where this goes? I know everyone tells me to take my time, but why can't I take my time with you? If I like chocolate ice cream, why do I have to try vanilla ice cream first before I have a scoop of chocolate ice cream? I said. Yes, I did say that to my eternal shame, but she giggled and then said she was okay with it. We made a date for the following Saturday night when I had the night off. Writing a book was so far removed from me that it was ridiculous. Sure, I had written hundreds of reports in my career, but that was the end of my writing experience. I've also never written anything in the world of fiction. Police reports are straight non-fiction, just the facts, ma'am. No style. Grammar was good but not required. Lucky for me, I've read my fair share of fiction, including all 6 of Jax's books. Like I said, if Jax was able to do it, one of my advantages over Jax was that I had lived the story, or at least most of it. Yeah, I didn't know Tracy's side of the story, but on the other hand, since it was fiction, I was going to make it up as much as I could. I tried to play on the edge, but it didn't work. She turned my girls away from me. It was time to stop being the good guy. That meant I was also going to use Tracy's extracurricular adventures against her. Recounting the parts of the story I lived through was far from relieving. It was very painful sometimes. I would write for 10 minutes at a time and then get up from my desk and break something, usually a coffee mug. When I broke the last of my 8 mugs, I went to Walmart and found a set of indestructible hard plastic mugs. I was only able to destroy 6 of the 8 before I finished the first draft. One way to keep my sanity is to overdo my hell adventures. In addition to having sex with her dying buddy on a trip around the world, I'd made her have sex with 24 other men, including a threesome in her Miami weekend that Jax had sent me some pictures of. Knowing Tracy as I did, I was sure she had no idea that Jax had sent me those pictures. I think she'll find out. I asked Twilight to read my first book. Lawyers are usually good with words. Besides, I trusted her opinion of good taste. I knew there would be places where I would cross the line, and I needed someone to bring me back periodically. The first thing she questioned was my choice of the name Tracy for the cheating wife in the book. She knew that truth is a defense against slander and libel, but calling the second main character by my ex-wife's name was almost an invitation to a lawsuit, which I would have had to spend money to defend against anyway. And you'll essentially declare yourself a cuckold, she said. You've kept it quiet while she traveled the world cheating on you, but if you do it this way, you'll be shouting it from the rooftops. I did it trying to protect my kids, but since they've jumped on Tracy's crazy train, I don't feel the need to be their offensive line. Let's blitz, I said. After 6 months of getting to know Twilight, I realized I had found the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and she didn't hesitate to say yes when I asked. 6 months later, we had a small wedding. I moved into her house, and life went on for both of us, except I contacted Jax's publisher when I felt my book was ready. I wasn't too proud to use Jax's name and my connection to him. It was the least my former friend could do for me. His publisher liked the first few chapters, and I sent the entire book to one of the company's home editors. She made 177,000 edits and had me completely rewrite 2 different chapters, but she ended up recommending the manuscript with great enthusiasm. I asked my in-house attorney, the newly renamed Twilight Rainwater, to negotiate some terms on my behalf, which meant we accepted their first offer because I, as a newbie, had no leverage to negotiate. I think in the industry what I wrote is called a bodice ripper. The audience is mostly women over 40. Let's face it, no one under 40 reads books anymore. Nevertheless, my ripper sold out its first limited edition in a few weeks, and the publisher tripled the print run for the next edition. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about the book industry, but the publisher released 3 more printings of my book over the next few months. It became a surprise bestseller. Who would have guessed? How did you find out about the threesome and Mary, boy? Rain Tracy asked quietly when I answered the phone a few months after the book came out. Most of what you've written is pure mud to attract readers, but you guess to details, and I don't believe in coincidences. Who ratted me out at that moment? A million thoughts ran through my head. Being a good guy wasn't one of them. Your lover, I said stiffly. The stupid bastard sent me videos of both engagements. He just needed to rub my face in your infidelity. Oh, God, no. I didn't want you to see that, she said. I'm sorry. I don't doubt it, I replied. I never showed you that, never showed the girls, even when they were protecting you, but that's over with. I'll tell them the truth, show them the video when they ask for it, and they will ask. Is there anything I can do to keep you from showing the girls these videos? She asked. It was, but you didn't have the smarts to do it at the right time. That time is long gone now, I commented. It was a week before my youngest daughter called, and she was beyond furious. I know it's fiction, Dad, but you knew when you wrote it that a lot of people would think it was Mom, and you made her look like the biggest store in the world. I thought better of you. Lori read it to me over the phone. It's not all fiction, I said. Some of it was based on real events. I know you don't want to hear it, so I'll just send you the videotapes of the 2 events. I'll wait for your apology, then you can send those videos to your sister, and she can apologize too. I hung up and sent 2 videos together. They lasted about 30 minutes. After about 35 minutes, my phone rang. I answered it immediately without looking at the caller ID. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't want to believe Mom would ever hurt you like that. It's one thing to help Uncle Jax, but it's something else entirely, she said. Baby, it was more than one thing. When she was helping Uncle Jax, she cheated on me with him, and his being sick wasn't a good reason. She cheated on me because she wanted to. End of story, I spat out. I received a second apology about an hour later, accompanied by copious tears. I wished it hadn't happened, but it did. I didn't get rich directly from selling my book, but I did get rich when a major movie studio bought the rights to it to make it into a movie. They gave me enough that I could retire right away if I wanted to, and I did. The only reason I was still working was that the divorce delayed my retirement from the police force by 3 years. The movie was made about a year later, and I was paid a handsome fee as a script consultant. It took about 9 more months before the movie was released, and that's when the hell hit the fan, as Twilight explained to me. It's one thing to read the words, it's quite another to see the action. It's much worse. Oh, Daddy, did you have to drive that far? My oldest daughter asked over the phone. I'm sure we've talked about this before, I corrected. Your mother has come this far. You're accusing the messenger again. I'm sorry, Daddy, she replied quietly. It's just that you and Twyla have a very good life, and she, not so much. It's her choice, baby. Actions have consequences. She chose to walk out the door to go on a trip around the world with a man who was not her husband. I loved her. I warned her. She didn't love me enough, not to do it? For some strange reason, she decided she could have her cake and eat it too. Hell, that's not how it works in real life. She ruined my life. If I hadn't found Twilight, my life would have been miserable. Your mother made her choice to throw me away, threw me away. I don't spend 1 second of my life worrying about what her life will be like. She stepped in hell. Why is she surprised that her life smells like hell? The music in the background was getting louder and louder. Carnival in Rio de Janeiro was kind of like Mardi Gras in New Orleans on steroids. Twilight and I decided we needed to take our trip around the world. Sorry, babe, but the music's getting too loud to keep talking. Say hi to everyone back home. We'll talk later, I said.